This is the story of a project, one that sums up just how absolutely incredible Ford's total performance era of the 1960s was. This wasn't a project designed to change the world or challenge the established norms of the automotive universe or to make some sort of a statement about the future. No, the simple job of this interesting little car was to sell batteries. That's it. It's a look into the things racers and gearheads can come up with given an unlimited budget, the best talent, and the best creative ideas. The Ford Autolite Lead Wedge may be one of the most forgotten parts of the total performance era, but it played a great part in its promotion and serves as one of the best illustrations of when pure hot rodders dominated the decision-making ranks of Detroit. The story of the Lead Wedge can start in any number of places and in any number of decades, so, All right, let's kick it off in the late 60s and see where that kind of leads us because, as you well know, getting to the root of these stories is what I love to do the best around here. Danny Eames, a man whose name has showed up in other videos on this channel, like the story of the Autolite Mustang that had the dual overhead cam Ford Indy 500 engine swapped into it for Bonneville runs, was also the brains behind the Lead Wedge. Eames was the manager of product performance and evaluation at Autolite, and to say that he was the right man at the right time in the right job would be an epic understatement. Born in 1918, by the first half of the 1930s, he was already traveling to Muroc with the early hot rodders. Graduating high school in 1936, he hit the ground running as a young mechanic who quickly advanced off the lube rack to performing complete engine overhauls and other heavy work. Pouring his paychecks into hot rods and projects, he was a well-known talent, and his ever-advancing mechanical skills landed him at Northrop Aviation in the late 1930s, which was where he was trained as a machinist by some of the best in the country. When the United States joined the rest of the world in battling the Axis powers in World War II, Eames knew what he had to do. He left Northrop, joined the Navy, and for 2.5 years served in the South Pacific as a machinist, applying the skills he had cultivated over the years of his early life. After the war, he was working as a mechanic at a Lincoln dealership, racing, building hot rods, and living life at full throttle. Highly sought after, he was recruited by a Chrysler dealer, and they had an ace up their sleeve to get him to make the switch. A stock car. That stock car was fielded by the dealership owner, and Eames was offered the seat to drive it. By 1953, the amount of performance work the dealer was doing, the amount of winning Eames was doing, and the sheer volume of publicity he was receiving got the ears of the regional executives of Chrysler perked up, and they reported back to Detroit that they may have an all-star in their hands. The man who started out as a low-rung mechanic after high school was hired by Chrysler to be their chief test driver and lead engineer of their performance program. The company sent him to the Chrysler Institute. Famously, they also sent him to a 2-week charm and finishing school to make sure he knew how to properly hang out with the company's brass and their wives in social situations, and I'm not making that up. But hey, you never know with hot rodders, right? You're better off maybe making the education. His first large order of business was recruiting Lee Petty over to the Dodge brand in NASCAR. He performed this miracle in 1953 with Petty winning 5 races, and then in 1954 he got the ultimate payoff as Lee Petty won the NASCAR championship that year. This was proof positive that the program Eames was running, the parts they were developing, and the talent they were cultivating was next level, and every year he was a higher and higher horsepower guy in the halls of Chrysler. But a 1957 disaster would sour him with the company and send him across town. In 1957, Eames and his wife were struck head-on by another vehicle. Eames was about the only survivor of the wreckage, and as the story goes, Chrysler showed him very little empathy or concern in the following months, and that ate at him. Now, Ford had been after Eames for years, but loyalty kept him where he was. Feeling that the loyalty had been one way, he reached out to Dearborn. And they told him they wouldn't take him from Chrysler. But if he resigned his job and was officially off the payroll, they'd talk. He quit and quickly signed on with Ford. His first project? Simple. Drive around the world with Phil Remington in a Ford with an armada of trucks, a full production crew, and a pre-production car that they'd have to fix in any number of exotic locations. Over the course of 119 days, which was supposed to be about 80, they crossed through 117 countries. Ford eventually needed the car back. The cargo plane they dispatched to Burma was too small, so they sent it back in 2 pieces. they literally sawed the car in half. And this is a verifiable true story. Assigned to Ford's Autolite division during the Total Performance years, he assembled a team of racing and hot rodding heroes, from Art Chrisman, who oversaw the drag racing program, to Chiki Hiroshima, to oversee open wheel and other racing programs. Eames was a man of action, and when a guy like that has a blank check, look out below. In 1968, Eames was approached by Autolite management and tasked with coming up with an impactful promotion for a new line of automotive batteries, a high-performance line. Well, the high-performance line, unimaginatively named, they were called the Autolite High Performance batteries, which used their Unifill branding as well. Now, these were batteries with more cranking amps and more robust construction that were designed with cars with ever more electronic accessories, more compression, and more displacement that would need to be cranked over in the freezing cold climates of the East Coast and northern areas of the country. All of that is well and good, but it really isn't all that exciting to talk about. And as these batteries were going to be debuting in the later part of the year, Eames was tasked with getting something going quickly so that it could hit magazines and papers by late of '68 or early of '69. This was prime time to be selling batteries through the dealers and service stations, as many people would be waking up to cold mornings and dead ones in the front of their car. So Eames defaulted on the same idea that everyone else at Ford had been defaulting on for years in 1968. Let's race them. But how do you race a battery? It's not enough to simply show them starting a powerful race car. The batteries themselves have to be the star of the show. Well, history doesn't record the moment that Eames decided he wanted to build a battery-powered streamliner. That's exactly what he planned to do, and timing was very much of the essence. When it came time to build a car, the likes of which the Bonneville Salt Flats had never seen, he called upon an interesting name to do it. Jerry Eisert was primarily a builder of open-wheel race cars. Some of his creations actually ran at the Indy 500. Others competed in other open-wheel categories, but he was not a land-speed car builder, nor was he a drag racing guy, but as a top-shelf fabricator and innovative designer, Eames had found his match. Paired with Bradley Dennis, a guy who had been at the forefront of Detroit factory skunkworks projects since the fuely 1957 Chevrolets and NASCAR, they had a 60-day window to design and build a machine that would set a land speed record, or maybe create a land speed record, as the mark they were trying to break wasn't exactly the best-known thing on the planet, and that means we should probably explain why. Walter Baker was an industrialist who happened to be the son of an industrialist. Posh as his upbringing was, Baker was a hustler, founding a massive ball bearing manufacturer and going on to start the Baker Motor Vehicle Company, which was a manufacturer of electric vehicles that was among the most prominent automakers in the early 20th century. Like a lot of rich guys at that time in history, he was also a sportsman with an ego, and that motivated him to go racing. Baker built a car called the Baker Torpedo. It was a two-seat machine with the driver up front and a throttle kind of brakeman sitting directly behind him. With the aerodynamics of an overturned boat, it looked like nothing else in this period of time, and in early testing, it ran like nothing else in this period either. Using 40 lead-acid batteries spinning a 14-horsepower electric motor, all swathed in that weird wooden body, the contraption weighed 3,000 pounds. And better yet, the thing went like greased lightning when they tested it. In May of 1902, the car was transported to Staten Island, New York, where speed trials were held on public roads. At a recorded speed of about 70 miles per hour, with Baker at the wheel and chief mechanic C.E. Denzer at the throttle and brake controls, the car continued to accelerate. Losing control after hitting train tracks, the torpedo shot into the assembled crowd. The scene was horrifying, with many people hurt and at least one fatality. Baker himself tried to make an escape in another car, but was arrested and stood trial for the mess that he had caused. He was acquitted, as it was learned that the spectators had violated the safety viewing areas of the racetrack, and so he went free. It was claimed and later estimated with no substantiation that the car was going 102 miles per hour when it crashed. If so, it would have been the first car to exceed 100 miles per hour by a long shot. Rebuilt and toured around the country, the Torpedo was a massive attraction at car shows, fairs, and wherever else it was displayed. In 1904, Baker built the Torpedo Kid. This was a smaller version of the first car with better aerodynamics, and it was even faster. And as it turns out, Baker was still a big hazard behind the wheel. He had recorded a speed of 136 miles per hour on Ormond Beach moments before one of the wheels flew off, and he wrecked in incredibly violent fashion. Going home, he never raced again. So this brings us back to 1968 in the Lead Wedge. As you'll see in reporting around the car, the year 1902 is often cited. You'll see speeds quoted of 84 miles per hour and 102 miles per hour, but 1904 is never mentioned, nor the 136 mile per hour speed. The bottom line is that no one had tried to go really fast with batteries in more than half a century, and that was about to change. Legendary Ford designer, hot rodder, and racer Larry Shinoda was placed in charge of the body shape for the machine that would be known as the Lead Wedge. He took care of the wedge part, taking inspiration from the turbine cars making headlines at the Indy 500 and the McLaren Can-Am cars. He came up with a curvaceous streamliner body. Now, it enclosed all four wheels and placed the driver under a perfectly flat plexiglass canopy-style covering. More on that in a minute. The body used that rising wedge shape from the Indy 500 cars, even used the sharply cut off and blunted rear end that they used in those designs as well. The specs were handed to Eisert and Dennis to create. Meanwhile, they were working on the chassis and bones of the car, and it should be noted that those guys built not only the chassis, but they also built the body, which ranged in thickness from 40 thousandths to 125 thousandths across its different areas, and yes, it was made of fiberglass. In so many ways, the rest of the car was kind of like an overgrown go-kart. A tubular front end and rear section were tied into an aluminum monocoque tub. The driver sat dead center, lying almost perfectly on his back, and there were racks of effectively 10 batteries up either side of the car next to the driver. The front end used rack and pinion steering from a small English Ford car and had a very limited range of motion. There was no suspension at all. Sports car tires were used, and there was no throttle pedal. The propulsion came from a 40-horsepower General Electric motor. Now, depending on what you read or who you ask, it was either the motor used in the General Electric torpedo program, which was long-lasting and extensive, or one from a large electric forklift. Now I'm going with the torpedo because it frankly sounds way cooler to have a motor from a torpedo powering this car, which, oh by the way, was wired to receive a far more lively than normal 120 volts at 1200 amps. General Electric was estimating the output of the motor at somewhere around 150 horsepower with all this electricity coursing through its veins. Now, the motor was hooked directly to a large gear on a solid rear axle via a monster 5-row wide roller chain. No transmission of any kind was used. Now, back to the go-kart analogy, that gear turned both tires with no sort of differential. The juice came in the form of 20 Autolite High Performance batteries. Yes, 20, maybe 21 if you count the one in the nose of the car, seemingly there for ballast. Now, there was a large bank of resistors elevated behind the rear tires. These would provide the power management of the wedge, and General Electric had aided in their development. There were small fans to ventilate the hydrogen gas generated by the batteries discharging in their covered tubs, and this was done, of course, as an extra safety precaution. The cockpit had a series of electrical gauges and sequence buttons for the driver to hit, and we're going to go through that process in just a moment. When completed, the Lead Wedge was 166 inches long, 44 inches wide, 32 inches tall, and had a 116-inch wheelbase. The track width in the front was 27 inches, at the back 37 inches. Before the driver, the car weighed some 2,060 pounds. Now, when you factor in the weight of just those batteries, all those batteries, and a big 40-horsepower electric motor, you probably have about 85 to 90% of the mass of the entire vehicle. Danny Eames knew exactly who he wanted to have drive the car on the Bonneville Salt Flats, and that man's name was Danny Eames. Now, Ford and Autolite executives were not in favor of having their most important guy getting the test pilot job in this machine, so they told him to pick someone else. Thankfully, he knew just the guy, and as luck would have it, they wouldn't have to pay this dude a dime in cold, hard American cash. Jerry Kugel had a story like Danny Eames. A car-obsessed kid who moved to Whittier, California with his family at a young age, he worked on his own cars, managed to get a job as a mechanic, and as soon as he felt ready, was poking around race car and hot rod shops in California seeking the kind of work he really wanted to do. The first guy to give young Jerry Kugel a shot in the race car business was our lead wedge building hero, Jerry Eisert. Working there in the late 50s and learning from the ground up, Kugel was on his way to more until Uncle Sam called. In 1960, he went into the service. More matured and experienced after that, he was hired by Ack Miller. Now, he was hired as the low man on the totem pole, but he was at one of the most legendary shops in the country, and of course, Ack was deeply tied in with Ford. In the early 60s, Kugel had been land speed racing with success, and his first major break came when Ford sent Ack Miller a 260 cubic inch V8 to play with. Miller handed it right over to Kugel, who hot-rodded it, stuffed it in his coupe, and went 168 miles per hour. Impressed with that trick, he was sent a 289. He worked that engine over, installed it into a new roadster he was using, and ran over 180 miles per hour. The small block combination was good enough for a while, and then it was one man's misfortune, which turned into Jerry Kugel's big break. Ack Miller had blown up a 427 at Pikes Peak. Taking the forlorn and busted engine, Kugel fixed it, invented a novel new fuel injection system on the way that was based on aircraft parts, hill-borne parts, and a twin 4-barrel intake manifold, and he wowed even his veteran co-workers. On the dyno with 2 carburetors, the engine made 482 horsepower. Adding the Kugel injection system, featured on the cover of Popular Hot Rodding, the engine made 525 horsepower at 6,500 RPM. People were blown away that he had seemingly just figured this whole thing out from thin air, and then it got better. At Speed Week in 1968, that engine and his roadster created an incredible stir as Jerry Kugel drove it over 200 miles per hour. This was significant because he became the first unblown roadster on gasoline to break into the 200-mile-per-hour club, and it earned him a spot and a record in that vaunted organization. And this also made him a very easy choice to drive the Lead Wedge, and his price, as mentioned earlier, was also highly favorable. Foregoing money for the job, all Kugel wanted was a used 427 cubic inch cammer, and the Ford men had a few of those laying around to give away. And so, on the promise of a new engine, it was Kugel who would drive the Lead Wedge. Still reveling in his success at Speed Week during the midsummer, it was November of '68 when the Ford Autolite team got onto the salt. Unable to help himself, Eames made a short shakedown run in the Wedge just to experience it, and all systems appeared to be functioning properly. Kugel put on his helmet and fire suit and climbed into the car. Laying virtually flat, with the plexiglass enclosure fastened down over him, one winces to think how hot it had to have been in there under the relentless Bonneville sun. If ambient temperatures easily crest 100 degrees on the salt on a day-to-day basis, lying under what is basically a human-sized magnifying glass had to have been pretty painful. And driving this car was unlike anything Kugel had ever done. It was a real study in concentration. Now, as the car had no transmission, a big block Ford station wagon would drag it up to the max speed the wagon could muster, so about 80 miles per hour, and at that point, the party would begin. The driver would detach from the tow rope, hammer a button on the steering wheel that was basically the gas pedal. Next, his concentration would move to the volt and amp meters. Watching those, he would begin flipping a series of switches that would begin to bypass the bank of resistors in the back of the Wedge. Designers were fearful that full power instantly would cause too much tire spin and make the car basically unworkable and undrivable, hence the series of switches. Now, as the driver, Kugel, flipped the switches in sequence, 1, 2, 3, and 4, the Wedge accelerated harder and harder. How hard did it pull? The sensation was described as being akin to a hopped-up 289 Mustang in terms of that. Making a speed of about 140 miles per hour, the machine was turned around, and either all 20 batteries were swapped, or the car was somehow charged to be ready for the return run. Since this was being done on the FIA-style operation, it had to be done within an hour. Now, the second run was made, again in the high 130-mile-per-hour range, and by doing that, back-to-back, the machine became the fastest battery-powered vehicle in history, and the Autolite PR people did not miss a shot after this. Headlines across the nation, in newspapers, regarding this accomplishment went from coast to coast and back 10 times over. The machine was featured on the cover of Motor Trend and saw features in a slew of car magazines, including Hot Rod and more. Secondarily, a small cadre of journalists were invited to not only be on hand to witness the event, but also to give driving the car a shot. Newspapermen, automotive journalists, and even science reporters gave operating the Lead Wedge their best shot. As it turns out, a sports writer with no known racing experience ran the car at 119 miles per hour to beat out the likes of car writers, many of whom relegated their reportage of the situation to the smaller parts of their publication. Now, the speeds achieved by Kugel were recognized as USAC and FIA records, as Joe Petrali, the head timer of USAC and one of the most famous names in Bonneville history, was there to do the timing itself, making sure the whole thing was on the up and up. The odd promotion with the even weirder car was a huge success. The stories touted the use of the new batteries, the magazines as well. This brought a massive increase of awareness to a product that really isn't all that interesting, and it drove it off the charts as compared to what it would have been otherwise. The Wedge then went on a national promotional tour, visiting car shows, dealerships, and automotive events with people crawling all over it at every stop. And wisely, the car would usually be displayed with the body sitting next to it so people could gawk at all those beautiful Autolite High Performance batteries. Pushing this thing around must have been a drag, but the little streamliner that could did, and then went on to live a pretty pampered life. The car was housed in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum for decades, starting in the early 70s, before being auctioned off to a private collector for $63,000 just a few years ago. It still looks wonderful, and it may have been repainted, but outside of some nicks and other racing-related stuff, it really does look race-ready as it sits. Of course, the records at Bonneville are made to be broken, and the Lead Wedge's battery record was broken in 1971, just a handful of years later, by a machine called the Silver Eagle that averaged 146.3 miles per hour with a top speed of 152 miles per hour. Now, this car was built by engineers at the battery company that provided the batteries to power the lunar rover on the moon. Using an airplane belly tank, it's a really interesting and awesome study in the unique beauty of Bonneville racers. That's the story of the Lead Wedge. Not the longest story in the world, but one that I find pretty interesting. It's a perfect combination of legendary racers, a company obsessed with racing, and the most creative approach to promoting an otherwise eye-wateringly boring thing like new car batteries. Is 141 miles an hour some sort of incredible feat of human engineering? Well, it's certainly not 500 or 600 miles per hour, but when designed and built from absolutely nothing in 60 days with a crash program involving a dream team of legends from the designer on down, it's a really great success story, and one that I know I couldn't replicate with my own friends. The Lead Wedge wasn't trying to convince the world that it should run on batteries instead of internal combustion. It was trying to convince the world that they needed Autolite batteries, and in the context of the project's stated objectives, it was a massive home run. Total performance wins again. I'm Brian Loans. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for the most electrifying, high compression, high speed, and high torque content I can muster. See you next time.